Okay, welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. The appointment this week by President Bola Tinubu of Professor Joash Amupitan as the new chairman of Nigeria's election management body signals an interesting paradigm shift in the nation's search for true democracy. Coming after the momentous years of Professor Mahmood Yakubu, this particular change comes with heightened expectations for a lot of Nigerians on the one hand, and on the other, a certain level of indifference. What is there to expect from the new sheriff in town, especially against the backdrop of renewed calls for some form of electoral reform before the 2027 general election? Joining us now to have a conversation on all of that is Mathias Emeribe, who is a lawyer, public affairs analyst, and human rights activist. Good morning, Mr. Emeribe. Good to have you in the studio with us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. All right, let's talk about the new appointment. This is what is in the news. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody, like we said in the intro, is either you are excited about it or you are indifferent. 10 years after Professor Mahmood, a new sheriff in town is about to, come on the saddle. Professor Joash Amupitan from the North Central Kogi State, to be precise. What are your initial thoughts about this appointment? The personality of Professor Amupitan, is this something that you are familiar with? And do you think that he will be the right person to succeed the gentleman who has just spent 10 years conducting 2 presidential elections? What are your thoughts?
Thank you very much. Let me begin by first congratulating Professor Joash for this appointment, because clearly the nation had been in expectation of a new sheriff in town concerning our electoral system, and the government had on its own thought it better or best that this is the man whom they think can do the job. But I know that the job on hand is a very great one, taking into consideration the previous election we just conducted, and which of course many have termed to be one of the worst ever in 2023, as it were. But I think that with the coming of Professor Amupitan, particularly the fact that he's a lawyer, perhaps there may probably be a change, because by implication, being a lawyer, the tendency is to work in line with the rule of law. But having said that, I want to believe, with the greatest respect, that knowing too well the grounds under which a chairman of such an institution will be appointed, particularly the fact that, one, it must be a person of proven integrity, non-partisan, and so on and so forth. For the time being in force, it will be extremely very difficult for any person to reach any conclusion, except that to the extent that the man in question has distinguished himself professorally where he works, talking about University of Jos. And I know that he has a publication concerning Evidence Act. He's one of the very, very bright minds. I remember in one of the events Nigerian Bar Association, Ikeja branch, organized last year, 2024, he was a keynote speaker. And of course, he distinguished himself and gave us something that is also, we want to believe that, taking that into consideration, he came with a pedigree. But even though Nigerians have poor expectation because of the fact that if you look back concerning those we thought that will come into the saddle, we had expected that perhaps the government would have bent back a little to say, okay, we need people with experience that have been in the saddle of this very, very body for a long time, who of course knows the do's and the don'ts concerning election per se in Nigeria. But since they felt that, no, let us go out, we don't want somebody who is from the system, who probably have one or two of these things that may influence it negatively, to be the one that will be there. Well, let us pray and hope that we are going to get a very good and, a better election this time around.
I couldn't agree more with you. Now, speaking to the reform that we're looking at, especially with regard to the Constitution, a lot of people, I mean, many observers, it's even within INEC, previous chairmen as well have also alluded to the fact that we do not have a terrible constitution. We do not have an issue with the provisions of the Constitution. And even if we see a reform, the issue still lies in the implementation and respect for the rule of law. Now, we've seen a new person in this position, but we still have the same issues with regards to the implementation and respect for the laws that we have. Do you think that looking forward to the new elections, we will see anything different if this integral issue, foundational issue, does not change?
Well, let me be honest with you. Like you rightly mentioned, the Constitution and the Electoral Act we have present, as far as I'm concerned, I don't have any problem with it or with them. The reasons are obvious. Let's look at the 2022 Electoral Act, for instance. The provisions were novel because it, of course, repealed the Electoral Act of 2010, which we used up to 2019. In 2022, the clamor was very high to the effect that, look, we need an election that will, of course, bring about that confidence in the people themselves to own it, as it were. And the 2022 Electoral Act came in. And I know that, yes, very many senators and House of Rep members pushed against it, particularly with respect to the electoral transmission, electronic transmission of results from the polling unit, But unfortunately, the past chairman, particularly the 2022 election, because it's extremely very difficult for anybody to tell me that in the same election where you have the National Assembly and the presidential election at the same time, the transmission of results was easy for one and was not easy for the other. And they all took place at the same time, simultaneously. So anybody telling you something else is, of course, that the problem is the human agency. And that is why I think that the coming of the present chairman is to look at this human agency, whether within and outside, including even our security agencies, to make sure that they work in line with what the rule as prescribed in the law. I say this because, let me be honest with you, if the chairman on that day when this issue of transmission came out and said, no, this election will not go on, we cancel it because of the fact that, look, this transmission, because it will, of course, affect the integrity of the election, I can tell you that this man would probably be celebrated today, because what it will mean is that we'll postpone the election on that day to a next date. Unfortunately, after all, in 2015, we postponed the election. In 2019, we did the same thing. There's nothing wrong if we had done it in 2023. But because probably the money involved, they felt that, if we do it, we have spent so much money. And so, I mean, with all due respect, this in itself has created a very big problem for the Nigerian electoral system. So I think that the coming of the current man, talking about the chairman, all probably I would think he will probably do, in respect of whether they're going to go into the issue of amendment of the Electoral Act, is to ask for the implementation and interpret the provisions of the Electoral Act properly. Because for me, let me give an example. If you look at Section 137 of the Electoral Act, current Electoral Act, it is to the effect that you don't need to call any person to come and prove non-compliance. If the document on the face of it already has shown that there are what? Problem in itself. But at the end of the day, the tribunal and perhaps our court went about going to Section 135, which is there before Section 137. Because I thought that if probably we want to do our interpretation, the fact that you have Section 137 is an amendment to Section 135. Unfortunately, the court didn't look at it that way, or the tribunal. Rather, they said this election is in substantial compliance because that places discretion on the part of the tribunal and the judges to interpret.
So no matter what an INEC chairman does, the courts, particularly the Supreme Court, will still be there to give sort of the final verdict, isn't it?
Yes, they will. But I think that if there is a specific instruction particularly from the body, because it starts from the INEC chairman as a form of policy to the electoral officers. On no account will a mutilated result of this nature be accounted as this. No account. Right. But in this case, there are very many mutilated results. Okay. They were accounted. Blood result. Okay.
Mr. Mathias, we have a colleague in Abuja who would also like to ask a question. Adesua, please kindly go ahead.
Thank you so much. Now, I think it's very important, if we're talking about a new INEC chairman, we're talking about the sanctity of elections, but a lot of Nigerians say that elections are no longer decided at the ballots, that they're decided at the courts. So how important is it when we're for the National Assembly to approve electoral reforms? Do you think that, for example, that these cases should be completed before lawmakers or members of the executive are sworn in?
Adesua, can you just very quickly take it from the beginning for the benefit of our guests who just heard half of what you said? Just very quickly, if you could repeat the question.
Okay. Yes. So essentially, I'm asking how important you believe electoral reform is for the National Assembly. Should we have reforms such as making sure that the tribunals are completed before lawmakers or governors are sworn in? Because people are saying that a lot of our elections are not decided at the ballots, but are decided at the courts.
Well, on a serious note, if you even do the amendment that has to do with where the personalities are to be sworn in after the tribunal had given its verdict, the implication is that probably we'll start doing election from, just like we have 2027 election, we'll start doing an election from 2025. Because what it means that we are looking at the concept of the 180 days, the 60 days and whatever, and so before you say, Jack, we are talking of almost 1 year or thereabout before the swearing. So I don't think that is, for me, the issue. I mean, the truth is that if the election is well conducted by the personalities saddled with responsibility to do so, and who work in line with the Electoral Act as stated therein, we won't have issue. I'll take, for instance, I remember the 2015 election, so to speak, under Jonathan. I mean, the number of those that went to court were very few. It's not like what we had in 2019. That's true. And so ultimately, once you have a good and fantastic election, the tendency of that very exercise or process to be challenged is remote, so to speak.
All right. Let me ask these two quick questions. I know we're pressed for time, but these are important. One will be, what do you think should be Professor Amupiton's primary concerns now that, I mean, it will soon be confirmed. There are at least 3 off-season elections coming before 2027 general elections. What should he be doing with the governorship elections in Anambra State next month, and then in Osun and Ekiti next year before the general elections? And more importantly, do you think that there should be consideration at all for the proposal that is being bandied around about having all the 5 elections in one day? Do you think that that will be the call of the INEC chairman, and will it serve the purpose that people think it might serve?
No, let me, I think, let me start with the last question. Now, if the call, basically for all the elections to be done in just one day, I mean, for me,
5 ballots
yes,
to each election,
to be done in one day. Yes, because it may suit the purpose. But you see that, look, let me tell you, look, I want to go back to 2023, 2003, when we conducted, after the 1999 general election. In 2003, the order of election was probably governor before presidency. Then suddenly, I think when the question was posed, let us do, because it's like people want to protect their own position. So that is the reason why we have this problem. Now, if you leave it at presidency, you probably say, okay, let the president contend with his own election. And most of the people, particularly the governors, want to fight and say, because if this president doesn't come in, if he fails, we too, we are in danger of losing out. So we will fight for him to come in. Then on the other hand, if you say you want to let the governors the election come off first before the presidency, the same thing. So, but if you put it in one day, it's still the same thing as far as I'm concerned. I feel that everyone will be fighting for his own position. My take is that first, make sure that the human agencies that will bring me to the second question which you raised. The first question which you raised. The human agencies who are concerned with the election are given the Riot Act to follow. If that is done by the chairman, for instance, you have the institution of the Nigerian police or the security as it were. The chairman in election matters on the day of election supposed to be the commander-in-chief in respect of that election on that day. So he can also issue a Riot Act to the security agencies because they are part of the problem. I will not see, for instance, remember the 2022 election where we had election in Lagos, using Lagos as an example. You see somebody coming to say, if you are from so-and-so, you will not vote. This is sending the wrong signal. That is beyond even...
It happened in Delta too, so we should condemn everywhere.
We are saying that if it is bad, it is bad.
Absolutely.
They saw it, they kept quiet, and they are ignoring it as if it doesn't matter. Even before now, some people from the National Union of Road have already started threatening. These are things that the chairman must come out and speak directly to, so that the whole country will know that it is no longer business as usual, and do what is right in respect of our election. Because if we get it right in electing those who will come and lord it over us, what expectation? Every day we are shouting things are not going. Why would things go right? If for those we are supposed to put in there are not properly brought in through the process.
Yeah.
Everything you're speaking to, speaks to that electoral reform that we've all been talking about. The fact that these are some of the issues that we have continued to see from 2022, 2023. Your take on the reform, do you think that's exactly what will solve these issues and these excuses that we often see take place post the elections? Because we never hear of the problems before the election happens. It's usually when the results are beginning to come together and then there are discrepancies that begin to get noticed. Then we start hearing that there was this technical failure here or there was this glitch there, but it didn't affect the elections. And then the burden of proof, now begins to become another issue as well. So the issue of electoral reform, is that exactly what we need now leading up to 2027 as well, which will really, really be a very defining moment for Nigeria and Nigerians?
Anybody saying we don't need electoral reform won't be telling the truth. We need it. And that is because of the experience of 2023, particularly with respect to the issue of the glitch, so that we know clearly. But let me be honest with you. If you go by the current Electoral Act of 2022,
yes.
For instance, Section 65 places the burden as to how you transmit on the electoral body. And pursuant to that, they came out with their rules or their guidelines, where they now specify how the process will go. Unfortunately, our judicial system turned them down. So it is not even a question of whether you have an amendment. It is whether the human agency again, which I mentioned, will be prepared to abide by what we have. And in any event, there is this concept of morality that must come in, even by our judges, so to say, when they're interpreting these things, so that we don't end up making fundamental mistake concerning how the election, because you give room for, because take it or leave it, for most of these politicians, their own ultimate goal is to what? To be returned. How they come in is immaterial. But it is for us to insist, and the courts in particular, to insist that the right thing must what? Be done. So if you like, go and do the amendment. They will still want to see how to thwart or manipulate the amendment to favor them, because for them, it is for them to come in at all costs. It does not matter the road they follow in coming in there. As long as they are returned as people who won the election, that is all for them. So if the judges will stand up and rise to the occasion and give the proper interpretation as specified, because first, you look at the intent of the act. If the very thing has it that, for instance, the 2022 election has it that there should be dual collation. Suddenly you have just one. What does that mean? The effect, as far as I'm concerned, is to nullify the election. You have not complied with the Electoral Act. You do not mean, for all intents and purposes, it will be absurd for there to be an interpretation that says that, okay, since one is still existing, let us follow that one. That cannot be the intendment. The intendment is that one must supervise the other. And according to the current Electoral Act, if you have your manual result. That manual result must agree with the electronically transmitted result. So now what? By the current Electoral Act, the Electoral Act mandates that you must authenticate. Do you know what? The electronically transmitted result is the one that authenticates the manually presented one. So if there is nothing to authenticate it, on what basis would you continue to proceed with that primary one? With the manual one that has been, that was brought before you. Okay. How do you yourself confirm that the one that you have before you is correct when you don't have the one that you're using, confirming or authenticating it? That is the problem.
Fantastic. Mr. Emeribe, we'll take one more question from Abuja, Adesua, before we let you go so that we can have a robust, handing it on a robust note. Adesua, please shoot.
It's okay. We can. I know we have to wrap up. I know we have to go now.
Go on with your question if you have one. We still have about 4 more minutes.
If you want to.
Okay. Yes. Okay, fantastic. Now, we've spoken about the Electoral Act, we've spoken about reform, but, part of the problem is that the burden is on the person who's alleging to prove. And it's very difficult to go to case and you're taking a case against INEC, against APC, against the PDP, whoever it may be. Do you think that the costs of our elections, not just the electioneering process, but also the judicial process afterwards, has made our democracy weaker?
To some extent, I don't think so. It's just that all what you have is basically to also place some burden on the part of those who are saddled with the responsibility of implementing our electoral system. Now, if you talk about the issue bordering on the burden, as it were, especially for those who are approaching the court, for instance, to seek redress. That is why you have section 137 that I mentioned. It is meant to whittle down that so-called burden. So that if on the face of it, there are documents that tends to show that, this thing was not properly done, it is enough to put, even you have section 73, as it were, of the same Electoral Act, which requires that for any election to take place, before that election begins, the presiding officer must first, prior to the election, put down the number of ballots, the serial number, and so on and so forth. But most of these things were not done during our election, during the election of 2023. And the court allowed it to go on. And because that provision says, if these things were not done, it is enough to invalidate the poll in that particular polling unit. Unfortunately, these things were not done. What other thing do we need? What other amendment do you want to do? If you go ahead with any amendment and so on and so forth, the question is that, are they going to interpret it in line with this? The only one they continue to hold on to is section 135, which says that the court must consider whether that particular defect is substantial enough to nullify the election. So in such a situation, they now employed what you call their discretion, and forgetting to look at those other anomalies, talking about what you have under section 73 and section 137, to bring it together and say, based on this cumulative problem, I think that this election must not stand. Nothing.
All right. Very well said, Mr. Mathias Emeribe. We want to thank you for joining us on the morning show today. Thanks for the brilliant submission so far.